Welcome in on a Thursday, everybody. I'm Reed Cowan. Communities in multiple states unite to help each other in the wake of Helene. That hurricane's damage is devastating. Big question today, what else is brewing out in the tropics? Plus, the deadly police beating of Tyre Nichols in Memphis. Jurors at this very moment deliberating the fate of 3 former police officers. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Let's go. Right off the top, though, thousands of people living in southern Lebanon ordered to leave their homes as Israel's ground operation targeting the Iran-backed Hezbollah militia expands. So we're talking about 20 towns and villages, all of them right now under evacuation orders. So this comes hours after multiple Israeli airstrikes rocked suburbs around the city of Beirut. You can see the smoke and the dust rising there. CBS News correspondent Imtiaz Tayyab has the look at the damage on the ground.
Well, to give you a sense of where this strike, which you can see here in this building where those Hezbollah-linked medics were killed, we're only around half a mile away from Lebanon's parliament. It's just a short walk from here. And the fact that Israel has now targeted yet another building in the city center has so many people here afraid that more is to come. And they only have to look to the southern suburb, an area known as Dahia, where Israel has been pounding relentlessly. In fact, we were there just yesterday, and so many parts of that suburb had been damaged in Israeli strikes. Some so powerful, entire buildings were reduced to rubble, and all that was left were just craters. Now, this again comes as Israel continues to intensify its violence all across Lebanon, and as 8 Israeli soldiers were killed as they were carrying out what's been described as a limited incursion in southern Beirut, ahead of what's being described as a potential ground invasion, marking a very clear signal that if Israel does choose to make a major push into southern Lebanon, that it'll very likely be a very tough fight.
All right, so from Imtiaz, we go live now to CBS News Forum correspondent Chris Livesay. Chris, what more do we know about Israel's latest airstrikes?
Hey, Reed. Yeah, well, as Imtiaz mentioned, these strikes are ongoing in southern Lebanon. We've heard more orders or warnings, as Israel would put it, for people to leave in more than 20 villages. And, you know, this is clearly an expanding, a widening conflict. It's gone from being airstrikes exclusively to now also involving these limited ground incursions. Now, you know, Israel has certainly had the upper hand up until now. 2 weeks ago, there was that dizzying series of victories for them, starting with the exploding beepers and walkie-talkies, culminating in the assassination of the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah. Now that they're on the ground, though, that's when you're on Hezbollah's home turf, and this is where they excel. They have a track record for using booby traps, improvised explosive devices. They've got a vast network of tunnels. Suicide bombs are a tool of their trade. So a war that has mostly been a distant war, one that's been fought from the air, could get a lot uglier for Israel. In fact, there have already been 8 reported deaths of Israeli soldiers so far.
So, Chris, we cannot forget that this fighting is happening, playing out during the major Jewish holiday Rosh Hashanah, and also coming up on the 1-year mark since the Hamas attacks. How are Israelis you're talking to processing these new developments?
Well, I mean, this is a time in which people would prefer not to have to think about the war, but that's impossible, especially after, you know, the massive missile barrage that this country survived from Iran just two nights ago. Right now, the big question is when Israel is going to respond, and not if. There's been talk about what that could look like. On the far end of the spectrum, it could be something like going after Iran's nuclear program. That's probably not going to happen, according to the intelligence that we've been reading. That's because in order to do something like that, Israel would probably need to rely heavily on the help of the United States, on American weaponry, and able to access some of these sites, which are, you know, very deep underground, would require bunker buster bombs, things that Israel would need to lean heavily on for the United States. And so far, the United States, President Joe Biden has said attacking the nuclear reactors is a non-starter. But there's a whole variety of ways that Israel could respond. And as I mentioned, people here, rather than being able to focus just on the Jewish New Year, are bracing themselves for what Israel's retaliation is going to look like.
We know the eyes of the world are on this, not the least of which the leaders of G7 nations, who are also talking to President Biden in real time to see what the world's position is on this. Chris Livesay, please stay safe. Thank you so much for your live reporting. So we turn now to this live look through our monitors at the White House, where President Joe Biden and his administration are working very hard to try to avert that full-scale war in the Middle East. Before leaving to Florida, President Biden answered a lot of questions from the press on Israel's response, kind of like what Chris was just talking to us about. What will that response be? Watch.
Are you surprised that the Americans called that retaliation? Will you let Israel retaliate? What are the plans to allow Israel to strike back against Iran?
First of all, we don't allow Israel. We advise Israel, and there's nothing going to happen today. We'll talk about that later.
Let's bring in CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang live now from Washington. Weijia, you heard the president there. He said, not today. What can you tell us about plans you're hearing there at the White House?
Reed, it's great to see you. President Biden also said that he'd be offering advice to the Israelis about how to respond, and we know those consultations have been ongoing. And even though our colleague just said that the U.S. has warned Israel against attacking Iran's nuclear sites, he was also asked in that exact exchange about attacking Iran's oil refineries, and he seemed to leave the door open, saying that is something that they are talking about. So, of course, the big question is when there would be a substantial retaliatory strike, how big the ground incursion may swell to, and when. So the president is closely monitoring all of this with his national security team, Reed. But so far, you know, there are a lot of unknowns about how Israel will respond. We do know that the White House has insisted, even before the strike happened, that Iran would face, quote, severe consequences, Reed.
Well, we know the president said sanctions would be definite. And when you talk about oil there in the Middle East, oil equals money. We'll be watching that. Weijia, while we have you, I have another question. The president is in Florida. He's talking to those who've been devastated by Hurricane Helene. What more can you tell us about his message to them?
Yeah, Reed, this is part of a two-day tour that the president is on. He went to the Carolinas yesterday and did an aerial tour. Today, he landed in Tallahassee, Florida, and then did an aerial tour above Perry, Florida, which is part of that big bend where Helene ultimately made landfall and created so much destruction. And from there, he will go to Georgia, where he will tour the damage on the ground and get a briefing. And we also expect, Reed, that he will talk about the next steps from the federal government. Yesterday, he announced that the federal government would pay for 100% of debris removal in the Carolinas, Florida, and Georgia, and also sent 1,000 active troops to help distribute goods and food and supplies needed there on the ground. So he could make additional announcements. But Reed, it's really important for this administration right now to show that the president is there. The vice president was in Augusta, Georgia yesterday, trying to send the message that we are here for you, because as we've been reporting, our colleagues talking to people who are victims of this storm say they feel like the government should be doing more, and they are asking, where is the help? So this is an effort to try to show those communities that the president is listening, is there, and is observing everything that they are going through.
Weijia Jiang reporting live, and coming up in this broadcast, we're also going to be talking about Vice President Kamala Harris and her presence in those Helene-torn states. Our video monitors take us to Tennessee, where search crews are looking for flooded victims. But look at this. They rescued a dog stuck some 20 feet up into the treetops. That dog was there for days. In fact, look at that. These firefighters used a ladder to get the dog down. They found him stranded on top of that tree, and they think the dog was there for about 5 days after Hurricane Helene swept through that region. So, Jess, Hurricane Helene is the deadliest storm in the United States, second only to Hurricane Katrina. That storm meant business.
Within the past 50 years, it has been, and we continue to keep a close eye on everything that's coming out of the Appalachian area right now, as well as southern Florida. They're still dealing with a lot of the aftermath. And as we take a quick look at what's happening for us throughout the next couple days, I know it's almost hard to make out, but there are two systems that are out in the Atlantic. But the good news is, with those two systems, there's no impact by any means to our east coast that just got devastated by that major hurricane that swept throughout Florida all the way up into the Carolinas too, and past that as that dumped heavy rain into those communities. Now here's Hurricane Kirk. well offshore. I mean, you could see the Carolinas and all the states right here is just well off to the east. Now, as we extend, or the west, excuse me, as we extend into the next couple days, we're going to continue to watch that track stay offshore, not impacting anything, continuing to curl way back out into the east as we head into the next 12 days. Now, we take a look at our severe weather outlook for our friends who are in southern Florida and stretching all throughout the Panhandle too. There are still scattered thunderstorms in the forecast today, and this is throughout communities that have been just dealing with heavy amounts of storm surge last week. All throughout those areas, we've also dealt with freshwater flooding too in those inland spots close to Georgia. Here's what Futurecast is showing into the overnight hours tonight. Early morning hours tomorrow as we're gearing up for the weekend. We have more heavy storms sweeping throughout southern Alabama, along the Panhandle, close to PCB, Destin, and all those communities that got hit with heavy rain and winds just last week. And there's more storms in the forecast for us as we dive into this weekend. Just not nearly as bad, clearly.
We'll take that. Okay, so when we come back, we're going to be talking about two other states from a political vantage point, Michigan and Wisconsin. Those who want the keys to the White House want voters in those two key states to vote for them. We'll be live with Olivia Rinaldi and Aaron Navarro following the election. After taking a pause to meet with victims of Hurricane Helene, candidates Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are back out on the campaign trail. Harris works Wisconsin today. Trump, meanwhile, holding a campaign event in the state of Michigan. And as Trump prepares to travel today, there is definitely word that we are going to see some conversation about new studies into what happened in Pennsylvania. We're talking about that assassination attempt in Pennsylvania as Trump gets ready to travel today. New information coming to us right now about this story, telling us that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has been told to hand over any of the documents they have connected to these two incidents in Pennsylvania and Florida. That includes emails, texts, phone calls, phone logs, even handouts. And so, CBS News campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi has all of that and more as she travels with the Trump campaign today. Olivia, we're also getting reaction from Trump about Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's new filing in that 2020 election interference case. We know Trump comes out swinging against any legal challenge with Jack Smith. Do you think he's going to let that slide or hit back today from the stage?
Yeah, Reed, this is the first time we'll be seeing former President Donald Trump as he holds this rally in Saginaw, Michigan today, since that filing was unsealed and the unredacted version of it revealed yesterday. So we're learning a little bit more about that. As someone who's been at these rallies, Trump can veer into talking about his various legal cases plenty of times, but I do want to note what he said last night on True Social, where he called it unconstitutional, and he said that this was just a reaction to Tim Walz's performance in the debate, trying to tie this all back to what he is alleging is Democrats using these legal processes against him to stymie him in this election. Now, there is no evidence that that is true, but we could expect Trump to react to that today, as well as the parts of the filing that we learn about his former Vice President Mike Pence and their relationship and the growing tension leading up to January 6, 2021, and the several times that Trump had tried to persuade Pence to overturn the results of the election. We could hear him potentially react to some of that today. We'll certainly be watching here if there is any of that reaction.
And, you know, Olivia, Democrats really pushing reproductive freedom hard. They're blaming Trump for the repeal of Roe versus Wade. You have some new reporting on former First Lady Melania Trump's comments on the issue?
Yes, Melania Trump has a new book coming out shortly, and in that book she revealed yesterday her position on abortion, and she very plainly said that she believes in a woman's right. It's a fundamental right for a woman to have the ability to choose. Now, this is starkly different than the previous comments of her husband, former President Donald Trump, and the actions of his administration putting in Supreme Court justices who then eventually overturned the results of Roe versus Wade. So very interesting for her to be making those comments, especially just 33 days out until the election, as Democrats are trying to make abortion such a central issue in this campaign. It's something Donald Trump does not talk about very often. So it was notable to me that Melania Trump, his wife, would even put out these comments with the election just about a month away. All very interesting. It's being injected. We're all talking about it and finding it very interesting. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out in the coming weeks. Reed?
CBS News campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi, thank you so much for joining joining us on the stream today. So from Olivia to Aaron Navarro, our CBS News campaign reporter traveling with Team Harris today. So Aaron, this is interesting. The Democratic nominee for president is going to be on the stage campaigning with none other than Liz Cheney of the Cheney Republican dynasty. These are days that some say feel like we're living in the upside down. What do you expect the message will be?
Reed, good to be with you. As you mentioned, it's a striking moment. The daughter of the former Republican vice president, a Republican congresswoman, once the number 3 for House Republicans, is endorsing Harris today on stage in Ripon, Wisconsin. This is a deliberate choice to pick this city. It has ties to the birthplace of the Republican Party, and we're expected to hear Harris talk about that at her remarks, also praising Cheney for what she sees as a courageous decision to back her instead of her party's nominee, Donald Trump. Now, Cheney and Trump have obviously disagreed plenty over January 6th over the last couple of years, but still a very interesting moment that we're about to see here in the battleground state of Wisconsin.
Okay, so the big question is, will this work? And is there any indication there on the ground where the ground game is playing out that perhaps Republicans who are on the fence, like perhaps the Cheneys, like Mitt Romney, like others who've said they're going to vote for Kamala Harris, may actually do what they're hoping?
I've been watching what the Harris campaign has been doing in Republican outreach for weeks now, ever since they had multiple Republican officials speak at the Democratic National Convention. They've created this sort of infrastructure of Republicans for Harris coalitions in each of the battleground states that are doing events throughout this week. But relatively speaking, this is a small portion of voters that are even undecided or even thinking or are on the moderate side of things. But if you look at our CBS News polling, those voters who identify as moderate tend to favor Kamala Harris over Donald Trump. Yes, both of the candidates have their bases well in their corners, but in what's expected to be a tight race, those moderate voters, more on the fence, independent voters, could really make the difference for either candidate, and it seems like the Harris campaign is doing a full-on blitz to court those voters.
Aaron Navarro also doing a full-on blitz, getting the Sky Miles in. We appreciate you being with us today. All right, so as the U.S. elections keep the focus on the economy, more Americans filed for unemployment benefits last week. Layoffs are still at a historic low. We understand the low level of layoffs has really kept the unemployment rate from rising, despite a big slowdown in hiring. The full September jobs report comes out tomorrow. Let's jump the map now to the state of Texas in the aftermath of a school bus crash just south of Houston. Look at that. That bus collided with the dump truck you see right there. There are sadly some injuries to report. The school district says emergency crews rushed a student and a bus driver to the hospital. Still no word on their condition. We're watching. Our video feeds also take you overseas to the Congo for a tragic accident out on the water. So here's what we know right now. Witnesses say that boat capsized today. They say it went down while trying to dock just yards away from a port in the eastern part of the country. Those witnesses say they saw first responders recover at least 50 bodies out of that water. This is the latest deadly boat accident in the Central African country where overcrowding is becoming a huge problem there. You see so many people out there on that craft. So we are watching our video feeds out of New York City right now, where a former Marine accused of killing a man on a subway is in court. Here's CBS News New York reporting from outside that courthouse.
We start this noon with the latest in Daniel Penny's pretrial hearing. The Marine veteran charged in connection with the chokehold death of a man on a subway is back in court today. Investigative reporter Tyre Nichols is live outside Manhattan Criminal Court with the latest on today's hearing. And Tim, what's happening?
Cindy, the purpose of today's hearing is to sort out what evidence will or will not be allowed at next week's trial. And some evidence is being shown today, including video of an NYPD detective interviewing Marine veteran Daniel Penny after the incident. Penny has pleaded not guilty to charges of manslaughter and negligent homicide in the May 2023 death of Jordan Neely on the subway. Prosecutors say Neely, who struggled with homelessness and mental illness, needed help The system failed him, and Penny used excessive force. In the interview played out in court today, Penny says Neely was acting aggressively, throwing things and threatening to kill people on the F train. He says Neely approached him and Penny put him in a chokehold. Penny told the detective, quote, "I'm not trying to kill the guy. I'm just trying to de-escalate the situation." And in the interview, Penny also demonstrated for the detective the chokehold that he put Neely in, which could be key to this case as prosecutors argue he was negligent and his actions were unwarranted. If convicted, Penny could face up to 20 years in prison. Our Alice Gaynor is in the courthouse right now, and she will have a complete recap of the hearing this evening.
All right, so from New York to the other side of the country, let's take you live now to San Francisco, where the Bay Area is trying to find ways to beat the heat. And it is a sweltering one there as you look at the beautiful Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, Jess.
It looks beautiful, and they do have that marine layer usually during this time of year, but that's not the case right now. Over 30 million people throughout the West are dealing with extreme heat and heat advisories issued by the National Weather Service, whether it be just a heat advisory or an excessive heat warning. All that pink and orange you see just over into California, stretching over into areas like Nevada and Arizona. There is record-breaking heat widespread throughout that region. So as we take a look at our daytime highs today, areas like San Francisco and all throughout the Bay Area, they're still dealing with that extreme heat, while many of us throughout areas like Las Vegas have been dealing with triple digits for days on end. Denver broke a record yesterday. Las Vegas and Phoenix did too. San Jose 2 days ago, just south of San Francisco, also broke a record when it comes to daytime highs. The last time we saw that amount of heat on that day alone was back in the 80s. So putting it into perspective, this huge heat dome is continuing to impact many people throughout the West Coast. Taking a look behind me, daytime highs are going to continue to be the big concern for us as we head into the afternoon hours today, tomorrow, lasting into this weekend. So as I turn the page from our Thursday forecast throughout Southern California all the way into, let's take our Saturday forecast, for example. Notice how there's not a lot of difference on that heat risk map. The other thing I want to mention too is we take a look at what's coming right around the corner. The Climate Prediction Center is showing the next 6 to 10 days. It's still above normal all throughout the West Coast as this huge ridge of high pressure continues to impact thousands and thousands of people just with those heat advisories, and millions of people when it comes to daytime highs well above average. Reed.
Well, the people in the United States, Jess talks about, not the only ones affected by severe weather and battered by it. In fact, our video monitors take us to Taiwan now, and the result of typhoon there bringing severe winds, heavy rains, thousands forced to evacuate. In fact, that storm is now weakened to a tropical storm status, so a sigh of relief there. And now we just wait to see what the damage is. Different country, same problems. Look at this. People in Mexico also reeling from the storm damage because of Hurricane John. That one hit them earlier this week. 17 people lost their lives, maybe more. Tourist-heavy Acapulco is one of the hardest hit areas. That one made landfall as a Cat 3 hurricane before breaking up to be a tropical storm. When we come back, we're going to be going live to CBS News correspondent Elise Preston. The case of Tyre Nichols, 3 police officers, and their fate hangs in the balance. And a jury is discussing right now in a deliberation room. We'll go live. Today marks 1 week since Hurricane Helene made landfall in Florida. President Joe Biden is there. He's in Keaton Beach. Just moments ago, we got these images, getting an update from local and federal emergency officials on recovery efforts there. But earlier today, he surveyed Helene's devastation. He did that by helicopter. The president will head to Georgia to next tour a lot of communities who are also impacted by the storm. You know, Biden's visit comes 1 day after he got a firsthand look at Helene's destruction in the state of North Carolina. He was able to fly over and really take in the enormity of that destruction. You see it right there. No surprise when you see this, that nearly 200 people lost their lives across 6 states. By the way, hundreds are still missing, so the death toll could go up. CBS News national correspondent Manuel Bojorquez joins us now. You're in Marion, North Carolina. We see a lot of mud where you are, where there used to be, it looks like a parking lot. Set the scene for us. How are the people there in North Carolina doing in the wake of this?
That's right. They're cleaning up. I do want to warn you, at any point we may lose this signal because the cell service is still spotty here. But as you pointed out, you look at all this mud here and you imagine that the Catawba River is on the other side of that shopping center, and it came up all the way here and even then some further from where we're standing. So people are cleaning up. On our drive over from Tennessee, we did see today that there is still a lot of activity when it comes to emergency personnel moving from area to area, power crews getting into position and trying to establish the electricity again for these communities. A lot of action going on, a lot of cleanup. But in many ways, the big takeaway here is something that the National Hurricane Center had always been trying to impress upon us, that yes, the hurricane intensity and the speeds around the eye are important and destructive, but the inland flooding, the threat of water, which is always the #1 killer, that is something that people should also pay attention to. So in the wake of all of this, I think people will have to reassess how we look at hurricanes and their threats.
Yeah, water with the power to literally move mountains and mountains of mud like you're standing in. Manny, the president has deployed, what we understand, about 1,000 troops to that state. How are they going to help with community members who are already engaged in this recovery effort?
Well, we know that at this point, FEMA is still out looking for those who are missing with teams of volunteers. That's happening not just here in North Carolina, but also in Tennessee. So when you come to a disaster, as you know, the power is out. I mean, even something as what may seem small as just guarding and securing an intersection so that traffic can easily move and people can get from point A to point B, get resources across. There are roads that are washed out where they may need to build some kind of infrastructure, temporary at least, to get people back on their feet. But right now, we're just less than a week out of all of this, so you still have areas that are inaccessible, and those troops will be helping to try to secure some of those areas and really facilitate the aid that continues to pour in.
Manny, thank you so much. Reporting live from Marion, North Carolina. Be safe, and our best to those communities as they put their lives back together. So road hazards in South Carolina, just a small part of the aftermath after that deadly hurricane Manny's talking about. In fact, police posted this. Look at that. A chunk of the road not only missing on the highway, but also showing that if you take one step in the wrong direction, you will not only be under the highway, but hundreds of feet below the highway. Jess, Manny talked about this, how the power of water can move mud and literally mountains.
Yes, and of course the storm surge too, just as that hurricane entered Florida, hitting at a Category 4. Now we're continuing to keep a close eye on all the impacts throughout all the states when it comes to this system that moved throughout the states last week. But as we take a look at what's coming right around the corner, there is a lot of activity going on out in the tropics. It's just well offshore, and it's not going to be impacting the states anytime soon. Taking a look behind me, I want to start off with two different systems. There's Tropical Storm Leslie, and just ahead of it is Hurricane Kirk. And of course, many community members widespread throughout the East Coast right now are concerned about what's the next system that's going to be moving its way close to us while we're still dealing with all this damage. Now, the good news is Kirk is expected to stay well offshore, currently at a Category 3, continuing to move north and then back into the east, not impacting anyone in the states anytime soon. And of course, we continue to keep a close eye on Tropical Storm Leslie, but it's no factor as of now. Our severe weather outlook is still showing some active weather, though. Tropical storms, not a concern, but thunderstorms, yes, that's the case for everyone throughout Florida as we head into the evening hours tonight. Kicking off this weekend, we're going to continue to see more active weather, especially down closer to New Orleans and all throughout southern Alabama. Heavy storms expected there, thunderstorm activity, a chance of that hail is possible in those regions too. Tornado activity, not necessarily, but keep in mind, Reed, it was that exact area where that hurricane swept through just last week, and they're still dealing with more thunderstorms this week. So we keep them in mind, we keep them in our thoughts, but of course that weather is just so active during this time of year.
And relentless.
I know.
All right, Jess, thank you so much. So we promised you a little while ago that we'd go to the State Department. They are right now at that podium. They're giving an update. Spokesperson Matthew Miller on efforts to help Americans get out of Lebanon amidst the tensions there. Let's listen.
Yesterday, we are working 24/7 to help provide U.S. citizens in Lebanon with as many options as possible to depart. We know that not all of them wish to leave, but our goal is to provide as many options as we can to make sure all of them are safe. First, we are working with U.S. airlines to block seats for U.S. citizens. We are also working to
with U.S.
with airlines. Sorry, we are working with airlines to block seats for U.S. citizens. Excuse me. We are also working to increase the commercial capacity by organizing additional flights. In the past week, we have made over 1,400 seats available on flights out of Lebanon, and many seats do remain available. In addition, as I announced yesterday, we are organizing additional flights to allow more U.S. citizens and their eligible family members to depart Lebanon now. A second flight departed Beirut this morning with 134 passengers on it, bringing the total number of American citizens and their immediate family members who have departed on these flights to 250. And while we don't know the total number of U.S. citizens who have left via the seats we have made available on commercial flights, we do know that a high percentage of those seats have been filled. As I said at the top, we do recognize that a number of American citizens do not wish to leave. They have family members in Lebanon, and many of them are dual citizens, have lived there for a number of years. So we are also offering loans to U.S. citizens who may wish to stay in Lebanon, but want to instead relocate to a safer destination inside Lebanon. Americans in Lebanon should visit the embassy website or travel.state.gov to fill out our intake form so we can ensure that they are aware of all of the options available to them. And we urge Americans to take advantage of these options now while it is still safe to do so. That?
Yes.
Matt.
Well, I have a question on Diego Garcia, but I'll let that wait until the end because I want to start with
Sure.
Lebanon. So, first of all, when you say that 250 total Americans have or I just want to make sure those are all American citizens
and immediate family members.
Who may or may not be Americans. Is that right?
Yes, correct. May or may not be American citizens. It's
so
250. Of that 250, some of them are American citizens, some of them are their immediate family members who are also eligible for departure.
Okay, and there's no distinction between they can even if they're not a citizen, if they're a parent or
if they're an eligible
child,
immediate family member, they can depart
get
on these flights.
And these are the flights that you guys have organized.
Correct.
That are not on Middle East Airlines.
Correct.
Okay, so you're probably aware that later this afternoon there's going to be a news conference in Michigan with the Arab American group is organizing it. They say, at least, that they're going to announce a class action lawsuit against the U.S. government, but in particular the State Department for not doing enough. Now, the suit hasn't been filed, and yet, at least that I know of, and even after it's filed, I know that you were just going to defer to the Justice Department. But in terms of the complaint, the broader complaint that appears to be being raised, do you think that you've done enough to help?
So you're right. First of all, let me say that I wouldn't comment on a lawsuit, but I'm happy to talk about the efforts that we have provided to help American citizens get out of the country. First, I do want to note that we have been advising American citizens to leave for months now. Lebanon has been a level 4 travel country for months. We have been telling Americans that the security situation was unstable and that they should leave via commercial options while it is safe to do so. We know that a number of American citizens did leave over the past few months, but of course there are thousands and thousands who didn't leave and decided to stay, and some for very good reasons. Some we know have family members and, as I said, aren't going to want to depart Lebanon under any circumstances. But we have been advising people to leave via commercial options while they still could. Over the past week, as the security situation got more tense and as a number of commercial airlines that were flying out of Beirut as recently as the last 10 days or so started to cancel their flights, we then started identifying these other options to get American citizens out. The first thing we did, as I said, was to make seats available on Middle East Airlines, which is the only remaining commercial carrier flying out of Lebanon. And a number of American citizens have left via those flights. I don't have a number. As I said, we don't ever have perfect fidelity on the Americans that actually show up for those flights because it's via a commercial carrier. But we've been told by the carrier that a high percentage of the seats that they've set aside are being filled. But we just don't have an exact number. But it is in the hundreds. In addition, to supplement the seats available on Middle East Airways, we started yesterday organizing our own flights, and we had a flight with 300 seats available yesterday, and around 120 people went out on it. We had another flight with 300 seats available today, and a little over 130 people went out on it. We're going to continue to organize those flights as long as the security situation is challenging, as long as there aren't sufficient commercial options available, and as long as there's demand. So What we have tried to do is be responsive to the situation as it changes. So when there were ample commercial flights available, we were urging American citizens to take them. When the number of commercial flights shrunk, we first worked with the remaining carrier to make seats available. And when we found that there were still more American citizens that wanted to leave, we organized our own flights, and we'll continue to do everything that we can to help American citizens who want to leave get out safely.
One of the other complaints that's been...
All right, listening in to words from the U.S. State Department on the efforts to try to get Americans out of Lebanon. You know, you heard him talking about that level 4 travel status. What does that mean? If you're an American in Lebanon, what does that mean right now? They're saying do not travel to Lebanon, do not be in Lebanon, because they say unrest, kidnapping, unexploded landmines, and the risk of armed conflict. So you can see why the effort is now afoot to get Americans out. CBS News 24/7 riding our video monitors right now to Memphis, where jury deliberations have begun in the federal trial against 3 former police officers. They're accused of killing Tyre Nichols during a traffic stop in 2023. Those officers charged with violating Nichols' civil rights, unlawful assault, and failing to intervene in that assault. They face up to life in prison if found guilty. Let's go live now to CBS News correspondent Elise Preston. She is outside that courthouse right now. Elise, closing arguments ran late into the night. What kind of instructions did jurors hear before starting deliberating?
Reed, they were very late. Usually the courthouse closes at 5:30. Most days the trial wrapped up between 5 and 5:30. Jurors were here until 7:30 last night. This is week 4. They heard 3 weeks of testimony from dozens of witnesses, and the closing arguments kind of wrap them up. So what we're hearing from the prosecution is they say that these 3 officers band together. The prosecutor called it a beatdown, saying that they punished Tyre Nichols from running away from them when they attempted to pull him over the night of January 7th, 2023. Now, the defendants have various different pictures, but they're all saying that they basically pass the blame to someone else, saying that the 3 who are on trial said that, you know, when they arrived that they were told X, Y, and Z, that something had happened. So they were responding to reports of Tyre Nichols being violent. Now, there were 2 officers who already took plea deals earlier in this process. They testified during the trial that Tyre Nichols was not a threat to them, that they were not dangerous. They testified to this run tax that the prosecution had laid out, saying that they just wanted to punish Tyre Nichols that night, that it was an aggressive unit, and that's what they were doing. So that is what the jury has to decide. Did these 3 remaining officers, did they violate Tyre Nichols' civil rights and then work together, conspire together to cover up that beating that eventually killed him 3 days later?
Lisa, we've been seeing during your report pictures of Tyre Nichols. We're mindful that there is a family who grieves the loss of his life in this world. You're talking to family members. How are they responding as they have to hear all of these details?
Yeah, so his family was inside the courtroom the last 4 weeks, and they heard very gruesome, horrific details about that beating and just like the lack of care that took place that night. His family did leave when video was shown of the beating, but we saw about an hour ago, about 2 hours ago actually, his family, friends, community advocates gathered right out front here of this courthouse. They circled around, joined hands, and they prayed over the trial. They prayed for the outcome to go into their favor. You did see Tyre Nichols' mother break down. She was very emotional, and then she led the group in a chant saying, "Justice for Tyre." You mentioned there is a family that was left behind. It's been more than a year and 8 months since Tyre Nichols was killed, and his family has been waiting. I've interviewed the family multiple times over this ordeal, and they wanted this trial to get underway. They wanted to turn the corner in their process, but they also wanted it to be done right. So it has been a very long process for the family, as you can imagine.
Much to endure. Elise Preston, thank you so much. Meanwhile, new tactics, old tools in Russia's new and deadly attacks on Ukraine. They happened overnight. CBS News foreign correspondent Holly Williams reports how Russia advances their war in Ukraine.
Kharkiv is Ukraine's second largest city, and after recent Russian advances, the edge of the city is now only around 12 miles from the front line. This apartment building here was hit overnight, and Ukraine's rescue service says that 11 people were wounded, including a 3-year-old child. The Russians are increasingly using cheaply produced weapons known as glide bombs. They use old Soviet-era ammunition, some with over a ton of explosives, retrofitted with wings and GPS. The Russians are using glide bombs to terrorize this city, Kharkiv, as well as other parts of Ukraine. Now, the Ukrainian commander of a special forces detachment in the country's border guard told us that the Russians are learning and getting smarter. By some estimates, the Russians are gaining ground faster now than at any time since the early stages of the war back in 2022. Russia's now occupying around 20% of Ukraine, capturing Avdiivka in February, Vuhledar this week, and closing in on Pokrovsk. That's a Ukrainian logistics hub in the east of the country. Around 100,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in the invasion, according to US officials. But Vladimir Putin does not seem to mind. With a population over 3 times the size of Ukraine's, Russia's planning to draft more than 130,000 extra soldiers by January. The Ukrainians are frustrated that the US still won't give them permission to use American-supplied long-range missiles known as ATACMS on Russian territory. The US is worried that could further escalate the conflict, but the Ukrainians say those American-made ATACMS could help them counter the glide bombs and change the trajectory of this war. Reed.
Holly, thank you so much for that. So coming back home to the United States, our live feeds now take you to Phoenix, where the record October heat in that region is apparently here to stay. Mother Nature is hot, and she just continues to put the blowtorch on that part of the country.
I mean, Reed, they just dealt with record-breaking numbers this week on top of places like Las Vegas and all throughout Southern California and Northern California, too. Daytime highs today still well above average. And as you take a look at all of this mess that you see below me, let's break it apart real fast. Our heat wave is impacting many Californians. Over 30 million people with extreme heat throughout this afternoon. And as we take a look at the daytime highs, I mean, record-breaking numbers are stretched anywhere from San Jose all the way down into communities like Los Angeles and over into Las Vegas and Phoenix, too. Still sitting in the triple digits this afternoon throughout those desert regions. It is starting to cool down just a little bit more along the Bay Area and all the way down into Los Angeles. But taking a look behind me real fast, our heat risk map is still widespread throughout Southern California in that high to very high category. We continue to keep a close eye on them. Throughout the next 6 to 10 days, they're expected to deal with well above average temperatures throughout the rest of this week, heading into this weekend and early next week, too. That ridge of high pressure just really impacting millions of Americans right now, just needing that relief. I mean, it's fall, right?
Yes, it's fall. And we know so many people are watching, wondering what's going to be happening in the tropics and also what the U.S. response will be to Hurricane Helene. We just got this video a moment ago from Vice President Kamala Harris leaving Joint Base Andrews. As she left on her way to Wisconsin, she's going to be talking to the people of Wisconsin, but also she's going to be a part of the messaging that the Biden administration is behind those people who are so ravaged by the destruction from Hurricane Helene. Let's also show you President Joe Biden. You see that Florida map right there, mapping out the impacts of Hurricane Helene, and fingers on that map showing where the damage is the most difficult there for so many people to get through. The Biden administration pledging sending in troops to help so many people in so many states. Much more on President Biden's trip to Florida and help for those who are hurting right now in these storm-ravaged areas on CBS News 24/7. Stay with us.